You know, the Russians are known for many things. Making watches is not really one of them. But if you're into watches and all that, you probably know about Vostok, a Russian watch company with a sort of cult-like following online. You know, I thought the concept of Russians making watches was funny on its own, but you know, the more I looked into it, I found out that they started in the Soviet Union. Holy shit. Now, the idea of the Soviet Union competing with the finest that the Swiss and Japanese had to offer was too good to pass up. And when I found one of the old Soviet watches on eBay, I bought it up immediately. I probably should have done more to verify the seller's background, seeing as it was shipping from Ukraine, but unfortunately my $57 were gone faster than Russian democracy in the 90s. Too soon? Okay, so why did I put that clickbait title onto the video? Well, to be honest, I don't know if weird is the best word to describe these older Vostoks, but they are cool as hell, and the more I learn about them, the larger my collection grows and wallet empties. Literally, as I'm writing the script, I'm bidding on a Desert Storm Vostok made right before the collapse of the Soviet Union after they opened up to the Western markets. I mean, look at this thing. It has the American and Soviet branding. It's cool as hell. Alright, one reason that the watch I bought is kinda weird and or interesting. It's actually got a cool history, which is not something that every watch brand can say. Looking at you, a block print. The watch in question is a Vostok Amphibia with a 2409 movement dedicated to the 100-year anniversary of the Carl Laban, I'm just gonna say KL factory. Anyways, the watch would have been made sometime after 1991, though I don't know the exact date since this kind of information is not just readily available online. The Amphibia is and was a dive series watch created by Vostok, and the Amphibia I have here holds a 2409 movement. By the way, when I say 2409, it's not the caliber really, it's literally just a manufacturing code denoting the specs. It's actually quite an old movement, being created sometime around the late 70s, but still gets the job done pretty well. Vostok movements nowadays are actually pretty reliable, being primarily workhorse movements similar to Miyota's offerings, which is one of the reasons they receive so much praise online. The models that most people buy are the Komardusky and of course the aforementioned Amphibia, watches that nowadays are still very good for the money. Of course, with the ongoing conflict in Eastern Europe, it's a bit dubious to buy these. I don't actually know if you can still buy them directly from the factory like you used to be able to, but I wouldn't recommend it regardless, especially if you live in the United States. Let's just check the Vostok Europe website, and okay, I'm not gonna judge. It's a little confusing though. I know Vostok Europe and Vostok aren't the same company, but it's still kind of funny because they still work together. The Vostok I got is actually in pretty good condition. It just has the light scratches you'd expect from like a 30-something-year-old watch, but nothing deal-breaking. The lume is patinaed or yellowed. It's the same thing. I never understood why people purposely bought watches with patina already applied to the lume. Just seemed like kind of a cheap and lame thing to do. Anyways, the watch I got supposedly was serviced, but I don't really trust that since eBay sellers from Eastern Europe aren't the most reputable. Regardless, it is running quite well actually, maybe something like 40 seconds slow daily, which is about the same as my NH35 watches, so props to the Soviet Union. Anyways, the factory that the watch is commemorating is the Karl KL plant, which was named after the famous German socialist during the November Revolution, and who became a martyr for the socialist cause in 20th century Europe. That's just what the wiki says, I swear I'm not a German tanky. Finding information on this factory was pretty much impossible since there is almost no information, at least in English, about it. Best I have are some Russian articles and a declassified CIA file, which only gives strategic knowledge and none of the actual history of the plant. What I do know is that the plant was originally constructed in 1891 under the Tsarist regime, so I assume it was renamed to be socialist much later. Nowadays the factory makes artillery shells for the war, but apparently it's not enough. I'm not gonna lie, like 3 seconds after I recorded this part, I found out that there was information on the plant, but you know, for the most part I was right, it's just an artillery factory that was named after him. Again, I must say I'm not a tanky, I'm just really into old memorabilia like this, so don't take it the wrong way. Unless... Okay, this doesn't really have to do with the history of the watch, but I want to say it anyways. On eBay, there's a ton of old Soviet watches that you can buy for relatively cheap, which is how I actually got my Vostok. There are some fakes, but I mean, it's not that hard to spot most of the time since they tend to look pretty ridiculous and have really weird pricing. Although apparently a lot of the time the watches are Frankenstein, which if you know, it means that the watch was assembled from many different parts from different watches, and sometimes even different brands. You see it a lot if you buy from very suspicious Indian sellers, especially if they're selling old Seikos and Omegas. To be honest, there is a chance that I got a Frankenstein watch, but you know, I don't really care that much. Regardless of everything, it's still a cool bit of history on my wrist, so it is what it is. It is ironic to me that I bought a watch made to praise socialism on eBay and shipped to me using Ukrainian American postal services, but whatever. Oh yeah, I should probably mention the shipping if you're looking to buy one of these. A lot of the old Vostoks are sold by Ukrainian sellers, which surprised me since the situation isn't looking too great for them. But you know, I like to think I did my part by supporting local Ukrainian businesses. It did sit in Kiev for a solid 3 weeks though, and I thought I just straight up got robbed of 50 bucks before it cleared customs or whatever. The message updates were literally just packaged in transit, so yeah, I did not think it was ever going to get to me. Anyways, if you're in the market for one of these, just know that there are no guarantees if it ships from Eastern Europe. It could get to the States or wherever you live in 2 weeks, or it could just also never arrive, so you know, be a little careful. Alright, so here's some background on Vostok itself. I found it on a suspicious Russian website. I'm gonna just assume that it's true. According to the website, the Vostok we know and love started in 1942 with the Vostok Amphibia factory. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Which is where they still manufacture all the Vostoks, and back in the day they provided the Soviets with some very much needed watches for the front lines. They produced many different watch models, including the Pobeda, and apparently the construction of own industrial buildings, the meaning of which I don't know, but I guess they did pretty well for themselves. Anyways, after the Second World War, the factory's growth would increase even faster still, producing watches for the new Cold War that would lead to exports increasing 7 times by the end of the 1950s. Then in 1962, the sort of Vostok line was mentioned first as they were awarded with the gold medal at the Leipzig International Fair. That's just what it says, I don't know if that's true or not. They began manufacturing the first Komandirsky watches, and the Chistopol factory became the official supplier for the Ministry of Defense. Starting in 1972, Vostoks were exported to 54 countries. I assume those part of the communist bloc. It would be kind of weird otherwise. Later in 1976, cosmonaut Gretko thanked the Chistopol factory and gave them back to Vostok that went to space. The Speedmaster has nothing on Russian horology. Throughout the 80s, general improvements would be made to the different watch models as they were trying to compete with many different internationally renowned companies such as Rolex's Submariner and Blancpain's 50 Fathoms. And you know, everything was starting to look up for the Chistopol watch factory. Yup, I don't think anything could stop them from their growth and coming success. And the Soviet Union collapsed. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the factory came under the jurisdiction of the Republic of Tatarstan, a member state under the new and shiny Russian Federation. As was trending, the factory was privatized just like many other former Soviet industries and became an open joint stock company. With the opening of new markets, they started to create watches for the Western world, primarily Italy, the USA, Switzerland, ironically. And yeah, that's pretty much how we get the modern Vostok company. The same Chistopol factory still pumps out the watches, just with a new coat of paint, updated designs, you know. Now, I mentioned this before, you used to be able to buy directly from the factory, but I don't know if you can still do that now. I wouldn't recommend it. Regardless, they have a really cool history and attractive designs that reflect that, which just hits the dopamine spot in my brain that fucking loves Cold War history and all that. Reason number 2, it's kind of cool, weird, and or interesting. It looks like no other. It's very different, but it works, you know? I think I might just be crazy. Anyways, you know, I feel like at some point most of the popular watches just start to look identical after a long enough time, but these older Vostoks are unique for the most part. Okay, I guess the first part is not really true, but what is that Vostok makes some cool looking shit. I'm not in love with the company, alright? I just like them. It's normal. Looking at my Amphibia, I gotta say, it's a very Russian watch. It's got a utilitarian case with steel, of course, a complementing red and blue dotted bezel on top. I mean, the hands are nothing to write home about, but the dial is really something. It has a really nice vintage military look. The clear Arabic numerals are printed well, the commemorative Soviet art is aged quite beautifully, and the white dial packages it all together very nicely. It does have a domed crystal, which I'm more 50-50 on, but I actually kind of like the distortion on this specific dial. It brings more depth to the numbering, or something along those lines. I know I'm getting kind of pretentious, but I feel like the majority of the dive watches nowadays are just some variation of the Submariner, which is a time-tested design, but I get sick of it sometimes. I don't think it's for everyone, but I do see why there's so many fawn over Vostok. I mean, you gotta give it to them. They are different. I mean, these Amphibias were generally made for military use as dive watches and as competitors to Submariner and 50 Fathoms, but the Soviets were pretty behind in most technology, so they had to play catch up for a bit within the Amphibia and later Komandirsky lines. Regardless of all that, these Amphibias are still durable as hell, mine specifically with 200 meters of water resistance, so it'll be fine pretty much doing anything underwater. These Vostoks are kind of like Soviet G-Shocks. They can eat a lot of shit and keep going. Okay, finally, less important, but I'm still gonna mention it. Reason number 3, it has an old-ass Russian movement, which is pretty cool. This Vostok has a 2409 movement, which honestly I feel like perfectly embodies Russian design philosophy. It is not a pretty beast by any means, but it's a reliable workhorse movement that is cheap and easy to repair. It has 17 joules and a BPH of 19,800, with no date or automatic rotor complications, if you really wanted to know. Although the escapement is pretty loud, to be honest. I can hear it clicking very easily if I have it anywhere near my head, which sometimes gets annoying if I'm trying to focus, but you know. There's also the signature wobbly crown here. It's a staple in Vostoks, which I didn't know at first, so I thought I just kind of bought a dud or something. It was kind of weird at first, but I think I'm starting to like it. It's really nice how you can actually feel when the spring is coiled, unlike the NH35, where you just kind of have to guess. Maybe I'm just a simp for vintage shit like this. I don't know. The lack of rotor is a bit annoying though. I have to manually wind it every once in a while. I mean, I think I just listed the movement here as a reason since, I don't know, it's kind of a weird movement in general. It's quite primitive compared to many of the modern offerings, and I am pretty sure that the design is stolen from like a Japanese or Swiss movement, like many of the other Vostok designs, but you know, it's very distinctly Russian with its little quirks. Although the wobbly crown is charming as hell, I'm not even gonna lie. Conclusion. I don't know if the weird's the correct word in this context, but damn are these old Vostoks interesting. I could go on for hours just fawning over stuff like this, but I gotta wrap it up now. I mean, these watches have such an interesting history that may or may not matter to you, but if it's something that looks cool, I mean, they're not that expensive, so just pick one up for shits and giggles, you know? Thanks for watching, see you next time. Thanks.